Today we're going to look at a card that I mentioned recently and some other people mentioned recently, and that is Dryad Ranger. Nice little intro here for her. So, when we start, we should go over the history of Dryad Ranger. When this first came out, it was 5 provisions, same ability, but it had 2 power, right? So it came out as a 2 for 5 with the 2 damage, then poison. Then they buffed it to 3 power, and at that point it became, well, back then Harmony was actually really good because you had double play on Waters of Broccolon from the old leader ability that they removed from Scoia'tael. So this was actually really good. You use it as a Harmony card. It came down as 5 for 5 because you get the 2 damage. You didn't really care about the poison. Sometimes you get the poison, sometimes you didn't. If you didn't, you didn't care because it's a 5 for 5 engine. And back then that was really good, especially because it combined with the Harmony of the deck. So they nerfed it down to 1 damage on the ability. Did 1 damage, then they gave it poison, and they buffed it again recently back to having the 2 damage. So I'll just go over the history real quick here. So this is what it is now. And you probably have noticed you never see this card. And you also don't really see Harmony. So Harmony itself, we're not going to talk about right now. I think they're going to buff it in one of the big patches coming up because it is a pretty popular archetype. One of the things we can talk about here, though, the big one here is the ability. And this is why it keeps getting brought up as a matter of design. Because we have 2 things going on here. I guess we have 3 things total. Let's talk about them each individually. We have the Harmony, which gives it engine power combined with Harmony decks. And you don't have to have a Harmony deck to get like a point or 2 from this, right? Every deck that Scoia'tael probably has like maybe an elf in it somewhere, maybe a dwarf in it somewhere. Not necessarily a dwarf, they probably have an elf at least. So you're getting at least 1 Harmony proc from this, right? And if you're playing this and you have poison, you probably have a Weeping Willow. And then you have the second category, so you probably get at least a couple points off the Harmony if it doesn't die. So minor engine, nowhere near as good as some other engines. So keep that in mind. We have this little points going here. Now this is the ability that gets a lot of attention. So deploy damage enemy by 2, then give it poison. And the reason this gets attention is incredibly obvious. These are conflicting things. You don't want to damage something you then poison, because that damage becomes meaningless. Right? So if I'm going to poison a unit, it's going to die when I put the second poison on it. So if I damage it, that damage is meaningless because it doesn't do anything. Those 2 points I damaged with this ability would have been removed anyway when the poison went off. So that's kind of the conflict here that everyone keeps pointing out. And they're right to point it out. The thing with this so here's the thing. This would be so much better of a card if they just took this 2 damage right here and just put it and make it a 5. Question is that too strong? I don't know. But that is probably what most people think. You just take these 2 value here, you put it into here, maybe take a provision off, get rid of it completely, make it like a Thanks to the Empire, but for Scoia'tael with Harmony as an addition. So you trade a point here, maybe make it a bronze 4 provision card, and make it a Thanks to the Empire, but with Harmony instead of that extra point. But there are a couple uses for this ability before we get into potential changes or stuff that people brought up. And the one is, if you don't have the second poison, the 2 damage is decent, right? If you don't have the second poison, 2 damage is fine. This is kind of where it came from in the first place, right? People would play it not for the poison, but as a Harmony engine with an upside of 2 damage, and a really high upside sometimes you drew the second Dryad Ranger. So that was what people would use it for. And if you don't have the second poison, it's still decent value, right? You get a 5 for 5 on deploy with a Harmony engine. The issue here is that Harmony engines are worse than regular 1 point per turn engines. And the reason why is you have to play a unit, and it has to be one from Scoia'tael, and it has to be one of a category you don't already have out. So this is not one of the point a turn. The only time you get more than this is if you're creating units with a deploy ability of something. Maybe you play a Sorceress of Dolbothana, and then you create the Runestone. I mean, it's very niche, but you could also use the leader ability for Dana, but then again, that's a leader ability. I'm not sure you want to commit that. So it's pretty limited to 1 point a turn, and not even always 1 point a turn because you're going to have categories. So that's the thing with Harmony. I think we talked about that part enough. But if you're going to ignore this, damage enemies by 2, there are situations where you do want to use it though, so you don't always want to ignore it. Like we talked about there, the first one being if you don't have the second poison, it's a 5 for 5 engine, which is less than 1 point a turn, so it's obviously still not worth it. It's not worth it to have a 5 for 5 engine here. The 2 damage is nice, but the Harmony is not a great engine itself, and you're not going to play it just for that. You want to get value from this poison. But then the question is, if you're getting value from poison, then why would you have that damage? Right? It's weird. It's hard to say. There are a couple other ones. So, for example, this 2 damage sometimes is really valuable, something you don't want to poison. First thing that comes to mind here is these scarabs from what's his face? Azar. They're 1.1 armor, and they are defenders. So, against something like that, something that's pretty low, and you don't have another damage card, you can use 2 damage to kill it, but anything that does 2 damage can do that. But here the option of, oh look, there's this thing I can hit with an order maybe. Maybe you got a order set up and you can do like damage or 2 to it, and then this 2 kills it. And then when you don't need that damage, you use the poison. I'm not saying this is good. I'm not saying this is why you'd want to run the card. I'm just saying it's an option you have with it. And you can sometimes get use out of the 2 damage versus poison. Now, I think we talked about this enough. And if you've noticed, what I keep saying is you want to get value out of this or this, right? So you don't get value from them together. The only advantage the 2 damage gives you when you're using both of it is if this is the card that applies the first poison, and the 2 damage gives you a slightly more tempo. Then again, that 2 points could have been adjusted and put somewhere else on the card, but it does give you a little more tempo than if it just said poison. But generally, you want to get value from either this damage 2 by killing something that you couldn't otherwise kill, or you don't have a second poison to get poison value, or you want to get the value from the poison by killing the unit with the poison. And there's something you'll notice I keep saying here, and that's or, because we don't want to use both of these. We don't really get value from both of them. And this is my question. Why is this not an or ability? Like, why can't we pick one of these or the other one? Why can't it give poison or do damage? We can make the damage higher or something, right? So if we take a look here, this would hardly be the first time this happened in Scoia'tael, because we have, where is she? The Forest Whisperer. Just give her a row lock ability like this, like deploy, melee, give poison, sure. Order, range, give vitality. Why can't the Dryad Ranger have something like this where you get to pick which of the abilities we use? Because they really do not go well together, right? Like we've said, there's a couple ways you can maybe justify this, but again, each time you're using it as a choice. So why not have the ability itself just be a choice, kind of like the Forest Whisperer? Now, Forest Whisperer itself is, well, I mean, at one point you played this card, but I think this Harmony here might actually be more valuable than this extra point, but we're not going to talk too much about that in this video. We're going to focus on the Dryad Ranger. And we're talking about Dryad Ranger here. I keep talking about how the poison, you can use it for getting value. And we want to point out that if it wasn't for the Harmony, Dryad Ranger's poison would be just as valuable as King Cobra. Like, they essentially both have deploy poison, as we're pretty much ignoring this damage by 2 most of the time. And they're both 5 provisions with 3. So the comparison here between these two is you add Harmony for the Dryad Ranger. And we all know how King Cobra is probably one of the least played poison cards in the game. I've literally never seen someone play this. But yeah, I think that this might work as a choice. So we can give poison or we can do damage. And maybe we move the damage to 3 because the cards in the game are getting better, right? And 2 damage really doesn't do anything anymore. At 3, maybe you can combine it with an order on something that does a damage, and then you can use this to kill it. And then you have the poison or Harmony. And I'm pretty sure, by the way, that if we take a look at the Harmony cards, I'll throw this out here because I'm pretty sure that they're going to get buffed. They've been doing a lot of work on archetypes recently. And look at the Harmony cards. Dryad Fledgling. It's hard to buff Dryad Fledgling because Waters of Brokilon makes 2. Unless it has a deploy, because then the spawn wouldn't matter. So maybe this has a deploy ability, then you would have the waters. You could buff this by giving it deploy, and it wouldn't affect waters, is what I'm saying. But look at the other Harmony cards, so you just don't see Harmony. So I'm just pointing this out because I'm pretty sure that in one of these patches where they buff archetypes, one of the archetypes will be Harmony, and they'll get a rework. So it's not too crazy to suggest that something might happen to Dryad Ranger. And when we're talking about things to do to it, I really think the way to go is making this an optional ability, like the Forest Whisperer, where you get one or the other. And obviously I think Forest Whisperer is very weak as well, but I think that's the idea to go here. Make this an or ability, so you can use one or the other, so they don't go well together. Potentially you can still give it both, but if you're going to give it both, you change this, right? So you have deploy, give poison, and then the second part where they're not both deploys is what I'm saying, right? You can either have it be a deploy and you have like a melee ranged ability where you can choose one between the other one, or you can make this deploy, give poison, then order to do the damage. And that way you don't have to put the damage on the same unit, and there is still kind of the value to keeping it around. The only issue with that might be that it actually is pretty dangerous to leave around because you got Harmony going and you have a damage order, but it's a 5% bronze that doesn't come down for very much. So I don't think that'd be too crazy of a card. But yeah, the key to fixing this card, I'm pretty sure, is just separating the damage and the poison. I'm sure most of you agree. I think the two ways to do that are making it a melee or ranged, so you get to pick, and then adding the value somewhere else in the card, maybe removing a provision, maybe adding a power, something like that. Or you can make it so that the damage is in order, so you get poison, and then you can use the order later on to damage something else, maybe set something up, so you have to put it into the same card. But that's my thoughts on Dryad Ranger. I wanted to bring this one up because it's come up in the comments a few times lately as poor design. And generally, I kind of agree. Like, you can make a remote case that sometimes this is useful, like I did earlier when we started out trying to say potential good things about this card before I got into all the changes we could make to it and why it's not used. But it really is an odd design choice. I'm pretty sure that the poison was supposed to be an upside. Right, I think that wasn't supposed to guarantee you had poisons, and otherwise this doesn't make sense. But then when people started using it like that, just as an upside and not counting on the poison, after it got that one power buff, it got nerfed because that was too strong apparently. So I'm not sure. As far as the recent buff where they made this damage go back from 1 to 2, I wouldn't say much about that. I'm pretty sure they just saw the card was performing pretty badly and said, oh, you know what? We're going to rework Harmony at some point, because they're definitely going to. So we're going to rework the card then. For now, let's just revert the nerf, and maybe that'll help it out. So the last buff, I don't think they thought too much about, and just put it back in. Did a buff, or a nerf reversion, to try and help the card out. So I wouldn't say that's their final fix to the card. And I don't really complain about that one too much. I'm pretty sure that they were just trying to help it out while they get the rework for Harmony going. But yeah, that's my thoughts about Dryad Ranger. What do you guys think? You like my suggestions for changing it? Either make this an order, and then the poisons to deploy, or make it melee ranged and change the value around here somewhere. What do you guys think? What would you do, Dryad Ranger? Did any of you guys play when this card was really good? Remember the double Watershed Broccolon, where you guys all knew? But anyway, an interesting card, that's for sure. And it does offer you options of flexibility. It's just that the options are very niche, and the flexibility almost never comes up. Yeah, that's Dryad Ranger. Let me know what you guys think. And let me know what other cards you want to see in the future. That'll be it for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next time. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. And you can check out some more videos over here. And thanks for watching.